This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
I want to start with something. I hope this doesn't pop like that too much. If it does, I'll have to do something about it. From the New York Times, December 19th, 2007. Washington. Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, has called President Bush a loser and a liar. Mr. Reid has even used the word hate, in quotes, though he clarifies that it is a political, not a personal hatred he feels. I'm glad he said that. Yeah. Professor Ross K. Baker from Rutgers, professor of political science, says, there is clearly some toxic chemistry that exists between the majority leader and the president right now. Thank you, Professor. I think that's right. These are our leaders. These are the people we elected to run our country. And this is the basis upon which they operate. It's kind of chilling when you think about it. It says something about their level of maturity. And since we elected them, it says something about our level of maturity as well. That's why we're here tonight. This is kind of a little snippet of what's going on in the world. We have some serious issues to face, and we don't really want them handled like that. So let's start with kind of a one-slide overview of what we're going to do tonight. We'll start out with that there is a large spectrum of human values, a huge range of values that people hold that motivate them, that make them go. And those values, it turns out, develop in discrete stages, discrete steps along the way. So you have a certain set of values, and you have that for a while, and then boom, you move to another set of values. And we're going to talk in pretty great detail about that. The stages mostly hate each other. And you'd say, well, that's a pretty strong word. Well, New York Times, just quoting the New York Times. It's a serious issue, and as we go through this, you'll see that probably is not an overstatement to use that word hate. And that's killing us. We're getting bad decisions, we're getting bad governance. So that's why you came out tonight. In fact, there is hope. On a cold and snowy night in Ashland, Oregon, you guys came out. So that's right there, kind of a hopeful thing. I am not an originator. I am a popularizer. So I say thanks to Integral Philosophy, Ken Wilber, to many, many others that Ken Wilber draws from, Don Beck, Chris Cowan, who have written a great book called Spiral Dynamics that we're going to draw from a lot tonight, and many others. I brought a few books along. But I just want to do a blanket acknowledgement to start with, instead of just every time I turn around saying, oh, this is due to this guy or that guy or whatever. So what we're going to do tonight, between now and the break, I hope I can fit this in just about right. We'll talk about the stages, where they came from, what they are, how it all works. After the break, we'll talk about applications, examples, and I framed it in terms of 4 or 5 mistakes. I'm using that word mistakes, like missteps. We did something wrong. Today we do something wrong, maybe historically we did something wrong. And the problems that have resulted from that are fixable. So solutions and personal implications. People have said to me after I present a talk like this, well, what can I do? What can I actually do? And tell me some specifics. So I'm going to do a little bit of that. I haven't done that before. That'll be something new tonight. Talk about the specifics of how to make this work. When we're done with tonight, I hope that you personally can identify the stages in your friends, in the groups you're part of, in the communities you live in the political parties, the candidates, that you can say, oh yeah, that person's like, sort of falls in this stage, and you can do that. Movies, theater, and so on. I hope you can make that work. Like Michael said, ask questions, make comments as we go along. It makes it a lot more lively. And probably what will happen, usually happens, is I'll talk for 5, 10, 15 minutes and kind of get rolling, and then somebody will say, hey, I got a question about this. And then we'll start talking. Okay? If you knew nothing about human psychology, you might think that if you drew a little graph of a person's level of consciousness on the vertical axis and time in their life, like here they're a little baby, middle, older, you might think that consciousness would just increase more or less smoothly. Maybe a few little wrinkles here and there, but that's what you might think. If you thought that, you'd be totally wrong. There's been tons of research on this subject for the last 150 years. And I'll mention a couple of the researchers in a minute, names you'll recognize. They all agree, no, it's not a smooth, thing like that. It's more like this, that a little baby will be at a certain stage for 6 months or a year, and then boom, something happens, and bang, they're in their terrible twos. Who's the parent here that's had terrible twos? It just comes on, and then pretty soon, it's gone. It's just gone, like that. Then there's the high school, middle years, you go through some ups and downs, and then you tend to plateau for decades, literally. And I think most people just go ahead and live out their life at a certain stage, and they don't give it any thought. Why? Because this material is hard to read. There's a lot of it, but it's hard to get your hands on. You have to be a professional. You might have taken a class in psychology about Maslow or Erickson, Piaget, those kind of people that did some of the basic research. But boy, beyond that, it's kind of a fuzzy thing. You say, yeah, stages, I understand. But to put it into practice, Harry Reid doesn't get it. George Bush doesn't get it. So I think it's real important that we begin to bring it out into more of a public domain. So this is the idea, that it goes actually in stages. And the system that we're going to pick up on, like I said, there's been many of them, is called spiral dynamics. It was originated by a Professor Clare Graves about 1950-ish. And then some of his students wrote this book and kind of carried it forward. So that's what we're going to pick up on. These names for the stages I put on there because they have more complicated names, or I won't go into problems, but it's problematic using names because, for example, survival is a good one for a little infant. That's their value. They want to survive. Magic could as well be called tribal. There's a lot that's going on in a little 2-year-old kid. So the names are a little bit problematic, so please bear with me to just try to get a feel for the bigness of each of those stages. Survival, magic, power, law and order. I'm going to dwell on this. I'm going to dwell on the later ones here. Autonomy or autonomous thinking, green, and then integral. So those are what we're going to talk about in the next 20, 30 minutes. There are 2 tiers shown on this picture. And there are characteristics of these stages associated with the tiers. So tier 1, the first 6 stages, have a certain set of characteristics. And I'm going to talk about that. And then tier 2, and there are more stages and there are more tiers. We're just not going to go into them tonight because this covers the vast majority of people running around on the planet. Okay? Maybe a little better way of showing it. This has a more organic feel and emphasizes a certain feature that's going to be very, very important. And that is that as a person progresses to later stages, it's possible for them to include the previous stages, to carry forward the learnings from the previous stages. The trouble is, this is kind of hopeful, I can't think of the right word, but most people don't do this. That's going to be a major problem. So we'll see. But I really like the graphic because it contains that idea that you expand, you transcend, but include. So that's a nice way of showing it. And I wanted to kind of ask your indulgence as I look at a diagram like this. I do not intend tonight to be judgmental or to come across sounding judgmental, but you might interpret it that way, so I just want to ask you not to interpret it that way. I'm going to talk about some stages as being higher, more evolved, more developed, more advanced than other stages. So you might think, well, gee, he's judging these guys. And that's going to turn out to not be the case. We need all the stages, and we all progress through all the stages. The idea is that a person that's here understands people down here because why? Well, they've been there. They've lived through that. Whereas the person that's centered here really has not lived through this, maybe has an intimation of it, but hasn't lived through it. So this, the word I would use, is higher than this. Well, some folks are going to take that, feel it's offensive. So please bear with me on that. Jim, does that sound okay? You were the one to suggest. Okay. With that, let's move into the 7 stages. I'm not going to spend much time on the first one, survival. The characteristics, it's purely automatic. You're born, and it's instinctual. It's even pre-ego. Ego has to do with there's me and then there's everybody else. There's not me. And a kid a little infant doesn't have that concept. So it's pre-ego. It's just survival. I need to survive. It began with Homo sapiens. Oh, and by the way, I got 7 slides that kind of match this one. When I say began, this case doesn't quite apply, but that means a couple of tenths of a percent of the total population were there. That's what I mean by began. And as we go through, you'll see that. And today, something like a tenth of a percent of the adult Western population, Western Europe, United States, I'm going to include Australia, Japan, sort of the first world. A tenth of a percent of the population is at this stage. And if you're a careful mathematician, when I go through these, you're going to find out these don't add up. I've rounded them off, or somebody's rounded them off, not me. They're very approximate, but at least give you some idea of what's going on there. Survival is inherently a healthy thing. Basic physical survival, newborn infants. If you are pushed into a crisis, you can experience this value structure just come into the fore. That's all I'm going to say for now about survival.
So that's 3 million people in the United States?
Yeah. No, let's see. A tenth of a percent. So it'd be 300,000 people. Right? Do I do that right? 300, yeah, 300 million. 1% would be 3 million. So a tenth of a percent would be 300,000. Mental cases, people with severe trauma, head trauma, that kind of thing.
You talk about all population, this would apply just to children?
No, just adults.
These are adults?
Adults. These numbers apply to adults. Yep. And as we go through, that's what it'll be all the way through as adults. Okay. Somewhere, I have grandkids and I watch this process in action now as being a little bit removed from it. Magic, or could be called tribal, in a kid happens around age 1, somewhere in there. But historically, culturally, individual people figured out that we could do better if families, I should say, if they bonded together and formed a tribe. How big is a tribe? 70-ish to 200 or 300-ish, something like that could be a tribe. And what they did was they bonded around ritual, around a story. Very, very key thing. And they found out that a group that size has much better survival power than a single family working by itself, even an extended family. So it had a lot of power. They would tell stories about deceased relatives. Old grandfather's gone now, but his spirit's still here. They would paint the caves in the central part of France, paint things on the caves. They were quite sophisticated, actually. This is about 50,000 years ago. So humankind had lived for about 3/4 of its time, not having even this. Today, interestingly enough, about 10% of the adult population is centered on magic. And there's a lot of technical detail with what centered means. You know, we all range back and forth, but this is kind of the center of gravity. They have only 1% of the power, however. And sociologists refer to this particular value structure as archaic. And the next one will also be called archaic. These are the followers. These are the ones who just believe in magic. Now, there's a healthy part of this. Like I said, if we transcend and include, well, bonding the family together, ceremony and ritual. And many of us, intellectual types, overeducated types, have lost this to our peril. It's a problem. So some people can actually reclaim this and do things to recapture it. It's important. Rites of passage, sports teams. I lived in the Bay Area for 30 years. Raider Nation is alive and well. Somehow it gets a hold of guys' minds on Monday night or Saturday afternoon or whatever, and it's all over. There's a guy named Daniel Goleman who founded Psychology Today magazine, a writer for the New York Times, a psychologist, wrote a great book that I highly recommend called Emotional Intelligence. And he talks about beyond IQ, the sense of reading a person, the sense of reading a room and getting a feeling for something. That whole thing traces back to this value structure within you, within people, to the degree that you have it activated. However, valuable as it is, in its unhealthy form, superstition. I'm not just talking about crossing your fingers, but there are people that I know that are extremely superstitious. It really holds them back from getting away. And then gangs, ethnic violence. You must be shocked by what's happening in Nairobi. Nairobi was not a backward city. It was a leading city. And now we've got tribes, at least 3 of them, beating each other's brains out, killing each other. It's serious. When people drop into this value structure and have nothing else to lift them out, that's exactly what happens. Tribal warfare. So there's a sweet and a sour to this one as there is to all of them. But if a culture is dominantly magic, and if it slips into this, it's a problem. Okay, I'm going to keep moving because a lot to cover. So if you want to stop me, just put up your hand. Power shows up in a little kid around the age of 2. This is the terrible twos. And I know you've all lived through this. It's an art for a parent to handle this. We're going to talk about the one after this in just a second, how to actually handle this. The individual asserts himself or herself against this warm and fuzzy tribal thing, this magical thing. You assert yourself and you say, I am me, I am somebody. And that's just how little 2-year-olds are. It's just awesome to watch that. Aggressive, pugnacious, I am somebody, began with the rise of city-states, and this is the king. So it's still archaic, but this is the guy that says, I'm the king. And if you get in my way, I'll probably kill you. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to kill you. That kind of thing. Strong assertion. The Saddam Husseins of the world, the Milosevic's of the world. That's this. 20% of the people, this is kind of a thing that makes you stop and think a little bit, have this as their center of gravity. 20%, 1 out of 5 adults, they seem so nice, You meet them at work. But I've had this experience, I won't go into it too much, but where you peel back the veneer and you find out, oh my God, they are like, power is it. Pre-law and order, my way. Healthy form, terrible twos. Obviously an extremely important stage for a little kid. Creativity, when a person breaks out of a box. Several of you guys are artists. And I think you are able to very much incorporate this because you break out of the box routinely. Heroism, there's a time to say, I got to just jump up and take a hold of the tiller here. I got to do that. Party animal. These folks can be fun to be around. And you know what I mean? It's people who just like to rock and roll and, whatever. Time to break away, be a strong individual, stand up when you have to. Now, in the unhealthy side, I've got the word narcissism here. I don't know if you think too much about what that is. I talked to a friend of mine who was a mayor of Santa Rosa, and she said, yeah, I know exactly what narcissism is. And people come to the city council meeting, every week, same guy's there, and he's talking about what? Himself. His property, his this, his that. Everything comes back to me. Or I know people that in a conversation, you start telling a story, and pretty soon it's back around to them. Okay, it's tiresome, but it's deeper than that. It's a serious problem. Narcissism. They accuse us baby boomers of being narcissistic, and I don't know, maybe it's true. Rage, rebellion, predatory power, dictator types, all that traces back to this value structure, this level of consciousness. Isn't that interesting? I think that's fascinating that that's there in all of us. Maybe we've repressed it, detached from it, and it's center stage for lots of folks. Now, let's go to the next one. I'm going to spend a fair amount of time with this one. I watch my son and daughter-in-law with the terrible two grandkids, okay? And they have to walk that fine line where they say, here's the rules, and here's more rules and more rules and more rules. It's just rules and regs, basically up the wazoo, rules and regs. And yet they have to do it and not snuff out the kid. And I watch them try to walk that little balance. It's really a beautiful thing to see it done right. Because law and order, this value structure, this level of consciousness, brings order and stability. This is the Magna Carta, even though we're saying 3000 BC, 5,000 years ago, with the onset of monotheism was when this value structure came in. But to me, the Magna Carta is a great example. You get the king and you say, King, you got to sign this thing. We're going to have a written down set of rules. Okay, that's the deal. The rule of law and the fact that it's written, the book, is key. As Michael said, I spent a lot of years at Hewlett-Packard. I was in research and development, but I had to work with the production department a lot. And that's where you have to do things according to the book. And we literally have a book. It's now on computers, but it's written down. Here's how you do it. That's extremely important to keep society going. If you didn't have that written down thing, it wouldn't work. The other thing is, law and order is really big on hierarchy. And I'm going to just be specific here because I know a bunch of you, and I hope this isn't offensive. Here's a hierarchy for you. God, the Pope, College of Cardinals, archbishops, bishops, let's say a priest, normal person, bad person, person not in the church. There's a hierarchy for you. This particular value structure loves that kind of thing. Why? A, because it comes from God. It comes from the top. B, I know where I stand. I know where I stand. It works. I feel safe. I feel comfortable with it. And believe me, pre this, you had chaos. You had the strongest guy ruling. And then when this came along, you didn't have that anymore. And within a few hundred years, culturally now, this supplanted the power thing. And we had a much more advanced civilization with the onset of monotheism. Huge, huge breakthrough, huge boon for the world. This is the largest single value structure. 40% of the people in our country are there. Our present White House is a very good example of this value structure in place. This is called traditional. If you read books on sociology, this is called traditional. And that word is used in a very positive way. Very, very helpful, healthy thing. Healthy, glue that binds society together, stability for growing kids. Kids that don't have this, kids that don't have rules and regs, and people have studied this obviously, rudderless. Can't find relationship. Can't hold a job. Can't get the checkbook balanced because they say, screw balancing the checkbook. I don't need to balance a checkbook. It's just, they don't have what it takes to just keep it on course. Meaning and purpose is key. 4th of July, you're out there in the park, breeze is blowing Old Glory, the band is playing patriotic song. Something in you kind of tears up, kind of wells up. It's a feeling. That's a powerful thing. A sense of meaning connected to this hierarchical, overall wonderful thing. Higher power, it could be a religious thing or it could not be a religious thing. Mao, so on. Unhealthy, however, and I think it's kind of obvious, my country right or wrong. How often have we seen that? My country right or wrong. Fascism, religious extremism, the world is awash with this right now. In our country, yes. In other countries, yes, hugely. People who would want to break down the barrier between church and state and make a theocracy out of our country. They think that's a good idea. There are folks who think that. I suspect most of you don't think that. But a lot of people really think that. I've been in pretty heated arguments with people on that particular subject. Okay, let's see what else here. Oh yeah, religious extremism is an interesting thing to think about. The Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades. We're going to torture people to make them think like we do until they say, okay, I'll think like you do. Okay, fine, I'll do that. It's illogical, but people do it and they did it. I mean, it happens. Dominant in very conservative politics. Dominant in conservative politics. So, I think that's enough to say on this one. Let's take it one more click. Think about autonomous thinking. Now, I just described a whole structure that's kind of warm and fuzzy and safe and is sort of given by God, comes down from the top. This one, autonomous thinking, is, wait a second. I got to think this through for myself. Something bothers me about this. I can remember personally, I was raised in the Midwest as a very sincere, devout Catholic. But I went to a public high school, and my best buddy was Methodist. I was raised, now I know this isn't universally true, but I was raised with the thought that if you were not baptized as a Catholic, you would burn in hell forever. Well, I got to know my buddy and his family, and it just kind of dawned on me. So my friend Mike is going to burn in hell forever, huh? It just bothered me. At the same time, this was about freshman, sophomore, junior year, along in there. I got good at math, good at physics, and kind of began to develop this whole side of myself. And this is how it works in people. I'm not unique. It's just that's how it goes. Something clicks in, and you just start to think for yourself, and you ask the questions. And this is the characteristic that separates this one from the previous one. Is a tendency to say, I'm going to think this through for myself from fundamental basics. People who act like that are probably centered at this value structure. And I would hazard a guess that many of us here in this room are centered at this value structure. Doctors, lawyers, journalists, researchers, professors, they typify this particular mindset. So rational, independent thinking, experimentation, not dogma, pragmatic. This is the pragmatic one. We're going to try it out and see if it works. And what comes from that is people become ego-assertive. People say, well, I tried this out. I thought it through for myself. This is how we're going to do it. They become kind of like that. And competitive. Hey, I can make this work. I can make a bunch of money. I can win. This works. The good life follows from that. Technology follows from that, by the way. All of technology, which is where I worked for 30, 40 years. Abundance, material abundance. Began with the European Enlightenment, about 1750, give or take. Again, these are real soft numbers. 30% of the population, which is very strong. And notice this. Now, the amount of power exercised by this group is larger than the head count. First one that's like that. So this group knows how to get stuff done. They're efficient, they're effective. This is the so-called modern. Came in around then, the modern era. Yeah.
Where do you get the percentages? How do you come to that?
I didn't, obviously, but these guys have done research for really literally 50 years, and they have instruments, questionnaires and surveys and things like that, and even longitudinal, where they'll study people over a dozen years or so, and then just put it all together and see where they pop out. It's kind of amazing to know this. So, does that answer your question? And just to carry that one more step, this is Western scientific research at its best, I think. This is a great example. And let's just contrast this with the Eastern spirituality. Ken Wilber loves to say that you can meditate for years and you would not figure this out. It's not the kind of thing that you would figure out from an interior plunging. This you have to do with longitudinal studies. So maybe I'm answering more than you asked, but I think it's fascinating. We may say some more about that in a little bit. In fact, I will say just one more thing about it. Here's a sort of a mini example of the questions. You could ask a person, do you agree with abortion or not? Ask a woman that. And then come back and ask 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later, that kind of thing. This is literally what they do. That's be one of maybe 100 questions. And there's 3 answers to that question. The first answer is yes, I agree with abortion. And who are you to put your hands on my body? The government can't be in my bedroom. Nobody's going to tell me what to do with my body. That's a yes. The second answer is no. I disagree with abortion. It is a murder. It's taking a life, a human life. It's forbidden by God, by the Bible. So no, I don't agree with it. The third answer is it's a horrible thing. It's a sensitive thing that has to be managed very thoughtfully, but yes, at the end of the day, there's probably a time and a place. That's a different answer than the first yes. Here's the thing, is when they would interview people and study them, they don't go back. They go forward. Some, not everybody. Not everybody changes their mind, but some people change their mind over time, and they don't go back. They just go the one direction. So I'm kind of giving you a long-winded answer to how they get this stuff, but that's how they begin to figure this out. Is that communicating? That example really spoke to me.
About this autonomous thinking.
Yeah.
For a lot of people that are interested in getting back to the original values of the founding fathers and the framers of the Constitution and Bill of Rights, so forth, and getting back to original intent and the thinking of what was really behind liberty and freedom.
Yes.
And desiring to incorporate that into their values and promote that themselves, among others, and throughout society. This, I imagine, autonomous thinking would be the value system or part of the value system that would both then back in the 1700s and forward to our time.
Interesting you should bring that up. The answer is a super yes to that. And it's an interesting thing. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but democracy is an autonomous thinking concept. Why? Because you have to have a polity, a group that thinks for themselves and that's educated. Why? Because if people are capable of being led like sheep, you're going to slip right off that surfboard. You're not going to have a democracy anymore. So Ken Wilber likes to say that the Constitution is an autonomous thinking document. And thank God it is, because there's been quite a few times, especially recently, where the Constitution says, no, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. Whatever the something it was. But it's very much this, which of course is based on law and order. You've got to have law and order. I mean, you can't have people shooting each other in the streets in order to do this. And the reason I'm jumping ahead a bit, we're going to go into Iraq. Why? We're going to put democracy in there. We're going to stick it in. we're going to rip out the Baathists, the people who used to run the place and know how to make the power plants work and all that. We're just going to take them out. They can't be there anymore. Their values are wrong, so we're going to take them out. We've ripped out law and order. So they revert below law and order to what? Tribalism. Power, tribalism, shooting each other. Sunnis, Shiites, Kurds, tribes. So to put democracy, this, into that is not going to work. And these exact guys, Beck and Cowan and others, have been saying that for years. Don't go around to these countries and think you're going to just shove it in there. You haven't got the infrastructure, the build-up here.
So with each of those stages, like you were talking about, considering that they're actual steps and not a diagonal line going upward, each step perhaps is a tipping point, a breakthrough?
Yeah, it is. It's a tipping point. And even in an individual, what will happen, just to use a tipping point thing, is something's going to bother you. Something's going to be incomplete, something's going to be wrong, and then, and it's painful. I think anybody, and I'm sure we've all lived through that, it can be unsettling. Yeah.
My understanding of spiral dynamics is that it's really talking about the way people think more than what they're thinking. And so I'm wondering if you would be willing to take a what, like democracy, just as an example, or peace, and walk through the different ways of thinking, showing how someone would hold it differently depending on where they are, where they're thinking from on that subject. For example, if they were in autonomy, they would hold democracy perhaps quite differently than they would if they were in what you're calling law and order. Or if they were in, I don't remember the other names, but
yeah.
Would that help?
You know what? I'd like to defer that. I have a slide on down the line here that talks about religion in that sense, because that's going to be a hot button. And so it's an excellent question. If you don't mind, I'll hold off until we get to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I had one question on you were talking about pushing democracy in Iraq. You're not implying that they thought that they really believed that, are you?
I'm not implying either way.
No, I'm just wondering, are you? I'm trying to get the gist of this, and you don't think they really thought that? I mean, they're using that maybe to pull these people along, but they don't really think that, the leaders that are pushing us in that direction.
Yeah, I guess I don't really know what's in their heads, but our president has built quite a platform on freedom, pushing freedom around the world, by which I think he means democracy. One vote, one person kind of thing. So.
Right, but the critical thing I'm trying to look at is that what they do to move the people or to get the consensus is not the motive behind what they're really up to.
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't know, okay.
Yeah, don't know.
But this leads you to believe that it might be.
Oh, yeah, and I don't mean to imply that. Just, I'm going to keep going. Hugely contributory, as I said with law and order, hugely contributory. So is this. The European Enlightenment brought us out of the Dark Ages. Freedom, equality, justice, all the revolutions that happened there to bring democracy to countries like France, the French Revolution, the United States, and so on. Democracy, I already talked about. Science and technology obviously drops right out of this. If you spend any time in Silicon Valley, you know that's how the guys there think. They drive Ferraris and guys and gals. Material abundance. So I think I've said enough about that. Let's go down here. Excessive materialism. Are we a materialistic culture or what? I mean, it just kind of gets to you if you sometimes let it come in on you. The downside of technology, pollution, global warming, resource depletion, and so on. All that is the downside of this fantastic value structure. But the one I want to dwell on for another couple of seconds is, and I've known a bunch of them, folks that are masters at this level, that really do live, breathe, think, operate from here. It's a wonderful thing, but their basic deal is, I'm the smartest guy in the room. And you've got some ideas, and maybe I'll listen to you, but at the end of the day, I'm the smartest guy in the room. So I'm going to ignore you. I mean, who here has done that? You know, my wife will tell you, I've done that a few times. The result is a kind of an alienation, an existential angst. It's interesting that existentialism followed this. You know, Sartre and Camus and those guys, and then the philosophers, so on. This is real. You become so cerebral and so focused on how smart you are and how able you are to figure it out, either as a culture or as an individual, that you lose something. You lose a little bit of your humanity that you might have had back when you were at magic and all that. Yeah?
If you have two or more of those kinds of people that are thinking that they're the smartest people in the room, is there a lot of one-upmanship going on?
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, yeah. You just feel it, you know. Enron is a great example of that. Enron run amok. And they used to use that word. We're the smartest guy in the room. And I've seen transcripts of some of their emails going back and forth. That's how they figured it. Did you have a hand up, Steve? No? Okay. This is dominant in both political parties, kind of the middle of both political parties. The Wall Street Republicans, the more centrist Republicans, and then the more centrist Democrats. Talked about this. Oh, very important. We talked about hierarchy in Law and Order. There's a different hierarchy here. These guys say pure baloney. And I'm going to elaborate on that in a little bit here, but that kind of hierarchy that's dominant, domineering hierarchy, these guys say that is baloney. But I'm a PhD, you have a master's degree, so, I mean, we know it's that kind of thing. It's a meritocracy. And I use that kind of with my tongue in my cheek, but what this value structure values is true merit. The ability to get the job done. How much you know, how smart you are. Can you carry the ball? Can you move the ball down the field? Those who can are made CEOs or made presidents and so on. Those who can't are made middle managers or whatever. But the idea of a hierarchy is very much alive and well. It's just a whole different kind of hierarchy. Okay, got a couple more to go through here, but you can see how this works and how critically important this is. Well, now we're going to move to the next one. Let's kind of get back to this guy who says, I know I'm the smartest guy in the room, but there's times when I feel like I'm pissing people off and I really don't mean to. I just alienate people. Green is the antidote to that. It's the answer to that. It's the next step. And you begin to see there's a pattern here that each next step is a response to the previous step kind of carried to its logical extreme. And hopefully you incorporate what you've learned. Hopefully you do that. Green is egalitarian. So the key, oh man, I hope I have it up here. Well, the key feature of green is we don't got no stinking hierarchy anymore. We don't do hierarchy anymore. We're tired of hierarchy. We didn't like it when the church had it. We didn't like it when Enron abused it. We don't like it. We don't like that thing that dismisses certain categories of people. We think everybody's equal. We want to hear from everybody. This is Theory X management, for one thing. It promotes community, promotes caring. All of a sudden now there's an interior life that's not just cerebral. There's a spiritual side. It's like, oh, I have a spiritual side. There's a spiritual dimension to me. I didn't really think about that. And so do you. Hey, everybody's got this. Everybody's developing along some kind of a path. And diversity, maybe the person's black, maybe the person's white, maybe the person's, I don't know what else. On and on. Began around 1875. 10% of the population is there. On the West Coast, much higher than that. That's why you think, well, that's a pretty small number. Probably in Ashland, it's 30 or 40%. I'm going to just guess. Yeah?
1875, was that Emerson, the Transcendental Movement?
That kind of thing, yep. Women's suffrage started here. Really, I'm going to give you a handout here at the break. What I said was the environmental awareness came. We began to realize that there's a bigger thing going on than just the laws of physics and the, like that. So yes. This goes by the moniker postmodern. It's got some other a little bit more degrading ones, like deconstructionism is also part of this. I'm not going to go into that right now, but those of you that know about that, you can begin to connect those dots. Big, long, complicated story. Again, more clout than head count. Rehumanizes the individual. Some of us were lucky enough to go through the 60s and 70s, tea groups, go off on retreats someplace and somebody beats you up and says, you're thinking too much, you need to be more human. And, oh, yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. So that happens. Green is strong in interpersonal skills. This is the guy you want out in front, meeting the people. Okay? Open-minded, inclusive, compassionate. The 20th century movements, the women's movement, civil rights movement, the environmental movement, those are all of a form, somebody here was disempowered. And we're going to bring them up. And sure enough, the world gets better. It's kind of like that. Unhealthy, though. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through a book that was written back in 1970 by Charles A. Wright, The Greening of America.
Yes.
And I was wondering, does this closely relate to, I'm only halfway through the book, so I don't know the rest of the book.
I don't think it does.
Okay.
I'm using it like they talk about green construction, that kind of thing. This was a hard one to put a word on. I almost use the word consensus here. In fact, that gets down to this. Folks that are centered here, and I remember managing an operation for a while coming from this, we got to hear from everybody. I'm going to ask all you guys, is it too hot in here? Let's see, let's take a show of hands. And you know what? You can't please everybody. And anybody that manages that way is at a disadvantage to people that are law and order centric or autonomous thinking centric. It's surprising. This is a more advanced, quote unquote, value system. And yet, in terms of that one thing, leadership, typically not as effective. Why? Because, well, let's see. I didn't really say it here, but you can just be naive about that. You try to include everybody. You try to, not alienate anybody, not cut anybody out. And you can be kind of naive about that. I remember being that way. It just, resistance to hierarchy and authority just runs rampant here. And in fact, I thought about giving this talk tonight. I suspect many of you are centered at this green structure. And what I'm talking about is a kind of a hierarchy. And you're probably saying to yourself, oh man, this guy's judging these people. This guy's putting these guys ahead of those guys and all that kind of thing. It's kind of a tough sell. In fact, Ken Wilber has written a whole book called Boomeritis, where he talks about the boomers, that's us, and how many boomers are green. And there's some real problems I'm going to talk about here in a little bit that are reflected in this book. It is a problem, this inability to come down and make a decision, just say, look, I'm going to take charge, we're going to do it this way, end of story. The other thing that green can do as a manager in a company is you can say, well, those guys in accounting, okay, 10 minutes, and the guys in production, they're such stodgy people. They're going by the book all the time. I'm not going to give them the perks that I give these other guys. I'm not going to fire them, but I'm just not going to give them the perks. You know what? The good people are going to leave. You're pretty soon not going to have good accountants and good production folks. And those guys in R&D that are autonomous thinkers, they're really weird. They've got pointed heads, and they're out of the box all the time. They're hard to manage. Not good, not good. Green thinks like this, even though I'm saying they're inclusive. It's kind of a paradoxical thing. So that's part of the reason for their naivete and their not being good managers. Hope this is communicating. I can hear myself be a little bit convoluted. There's some problems with green, and I'm going to talk about that at length in a little bit here. Dominant in liberal politics, the real ultra-left is here. Academe, dominant. Academe loves this. Deconstructionism is a huge thing, especially in social sciences. The media, leave out Fox, so on, but the media. Social services, healthcare. Oh, your question about the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is green. The Bill of Rights says, hey, you can't mess with an individual. You can't take away their freedom to speak. That's a little different. That's different than, so the Bill of Rights is a good example of something that's green. Okay, I think that's enough. Now, we got 2 more slides here. Tier 1 and Tier 2. I said earlier there's Tier 1 and Tier 2. So it's a little bit of a sidebar here on our way to the last one. Tier 1, which is the first 6, survival through green. Maslow, you're probably familiar with Maslow, talked about deficiency needs. The underlying driver of those 6 value systems is this feeling, unspoken, unconscious, I'm lacking something missing in me. So I'm going to go out and do these various things to fill that need. I need it. It's a need. It's an unfilled thing. So here is the characteristic that unites Tier 1, okay? My perspective and my value system are the only legitimate ones. Pretty powerful statement. So if you are centered at law and order, you believe that law and order is the only legit thing. The rest of them are either mistaken, if we're lucky, or they're evil. They're actually evil. I'm going to let that sink in, because this is the crux of why I'm here tonight, to talk about the values war. So the example is, oh yeah, go ahead.
Would you apply that to green as well?
I would. Yeah. And it's kind of, let me give you the example of green. You're a nice little old lady, you're running the Peace and Freedom group at your church. That would fit great. And we're going to hear from everybody. All you guys, you can come on in here. This is the Peace and Freedom group. And you sit there and you say, we're going to bomb the bastards. We're going to bomb them. That's the only thing that's going to do it. Okay, now I'm this green lady. What am I going to do with you? I'm supposed to be inclusive, and yet you're not fitting my pattern. I know green is right. And I can't have you here. You have to not exist in my world. It's subtle. Everything I'm going to say about green is nuanced and subtle, but exactly that. So, excellent question. So that's where the culture wars comes from, Tier 1. Yeah?
Well, back at the time of the American Revolution, when there were a number of usurpations, different problems that American colonists were having with the king and the British troops, of course, on American land, and this whole clash that eventually erupted into the American Revolutionary War. How does that relate to, for then, what we can learn from that for our times, what was happening back in the 1700s with regard to culture? That was a culture war, wasn't it?
Not in the sense I'm using it here.
Well, political war?
Yeah, that was more like a power thing. We don't want you collecting taxes from us without us being able to vote. Screw you is kind of where that was coming from. This is a more nuanced thing in the case of green. And this thing between the value structures, that was in 1750 or 75, somewhere in there. And there have been a couple new ones that have come along since then. The law and order folks in Kansas look at the Eastern liberal media and they say, these guys are sending us violence, they're sending us crummy shows, 100 channels of junk, pornography, screwy news. They're sending it to us. They're messing up our kids. They're undermining our family values. This is bad. We need to muffle these guys. The guys on the Eastern media liberals say, these guys in Kansas are so dumb. That's what they say. There's a book out called What's Wrong with Kansas. They're so dumb that they would give up freedom of speech in order to maintain their family values. It's that's hatred. I'm using that to be hatred, that dismissiveness. These guys have got it so wrong that we're not even going to, that it's more like that. Versus I think with King George, it was a little, I don't know. I'm not a big expert on that period, which I think you might be, but.
But your example just now would be of cultural war?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to move right along here because we got just a couple minutes before the break. Tier 2 is integral in the next stage or two. What Tier 2 thinks, as opposed to this line right here, is every single stage is worthy and vitally needed for the whole. We need law and order. We need it. We need a strong military. Come on. Silly to think we can't have a military. We need creativity. We need out-of-the-box thinking. We got to have it. We got to have people who are a little different, that think differently. We got to have it. And so Tier 2 people work to repair and reintegrate. That's their passion. It just kind of comes naturally. I suspect a bunch of you, if you look at yourself, have that going in some way, shape, or form. Applies to the whole and to myself. And it applies to each stage. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute too. There's a repair that needs to happen to each stage. Well, it's not that complicated. All the unhealthy manifestations. We got to stop doing that. The guiding compass, it gets back to that picture with the circles, transcend and include. Go ahead and move. And then move again. Move to the next stage. But for God's sake, include. Bring along the best of what we had before. Do not alienate yourself from it. Do not dump on it. Maslow described being needs. I just read a book by him. B needs and D needs, he called them. Being needs and deficiency needs, or fullness needs. It doesn't cross your mind that you're needy. You just don't go there. It's more like, I'm just full of something that I need to get out there. I need to share this. I need to help out. I need to be part of the culture. It's just a feeling. It's a sub-verbal, pre-verbal feeling. So that's the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2. And I know I'm going to get hooked off the stage here in a second. So integral is pretty simple. Sees each and every stage as critically important. Here is the key characteristic. And to me, this is extremely interesting. The level of stress and fear in the individual takes a dramatic drop when you step into the integral value structure. Why? Because by definition, you're including all those things that used to be part of your dark side. Things I hate about myself, that violence that's associated with power, that law and order legal thing that I'm not comfortable with that. Well, you say, well, of course I'm comfortable with that. There's no need to be afraid of it. You stop projecting it on other people. All that goes on. I'm sure you guys know all about that. So this is just key. Big drop in stress, heart rate, blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. Skillful integration of complexity. Because when you reach this stage, this value structure, it's complicated. You don't just have simple stuff going on. You realize that there's this. We got to make this work. At the end of the day, we got to make it work. Began 1950, globalization. Somewhere in there, we began to get Eastern religion came over here. We find out what they're doing in all over the place. So roughly here, 1% of the population in where we live, West Coast, Ashland, so on, 2, 3, 4% maybe, something like that. 5% of the power, hugely, this ratio, 5 to 1, hugely effective people. Not necessarily in the limelight. Don't care about the limelight. If I need to be in the limelight, fine, but if I don't, fine, don't care. Works actively to integrate and heal the larger community. Focuses on the experience of living. That is the big thing for these folks. What's it like to live? What's it like to have an interior life? What's it like to really be present? That's more the concern than getting that new GTO or BMW, That just, and when you're in high school, all you can think about is getting that GTO or whatever. I see Ann looking over there. What's a GTO? It's a hot Pontiac back when we were in high school. So this is key. the experience of living. I think you guys know what I'm talking about here. Sense is a big picture. Unhealthy form, I frankly haven't been able to find too much written because it's so new. There's not enough time for a pattern to develop, but some writings talk about greed can creep in there, and I ask myself, why? How's that? Well, if you're very effective and you can really get things done, it's probably tempting to say, well, you know what? I can make a lot of money if I want to. I could. So I think, I'm just guessing here. I don't really have too much to back that up. But there's going to definitely be some downside that's going to evolve, that's going to push the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Yeah.
Spiritual materialism.
There you go. Yeah. Say more. What is that?
That's my spirituality is better than yours.
Yeah.
I'm superior because my spirituality is more advanced.
Oh, yeah. Good.
It's Rinpoche, some book, you can buy that title.
Okay. Very cool. Spiritual
Materialism.
materialism.
That's more for me at times. Yeah, because it's really, this,
It backfires though at some point.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. All the unhealthy ones backfire.
Are you okay if I make this announcement?
Why don't you? It's a perfect time. We're going to take a break here.
Great.
Yep.
For all of you who are excited about this subject, I want you to know that next month we are bringing Chris Cowan here to Ashland. This is one of the few times in the whole United States that he is going to be here doing his workshop. And I have flyers here. I'll put it out there. It's a 2-part workshop. The first part is 4 days, so you can come to just the first part and get a great overview. Or if you're like the addicts, like John, and some of us who are just totally enthralled with this subject, you can stay for Spiral Dynamics 2, where you go deeply into actually using the material and using the research that it was based on. And so I invite you, if you have any questions, ask me about it, but please grab one of these. It has the information on the back if you're interested in really diving into this.
Okay, I'm going to just keep on going because time is short, and it's going to be kind of a shift of gears here. Basic implications. We all go through the stages in order. Perfectly? Nah, nothing in this realm is as neat as it is in engineering, but basically you go through in order. I'm not going to elaborate that, just kind of register, okay, in order. You can't skip the steps. Little babies, months, years, decades, these wind up being fairly permanent. Other things about human psychology can be very plastic, very changeable, but this is reasonably permanent until you hit a transition point, and then it's a pretty big deal in your life. And 4 or 5 years go by, and you're learning, you're mastering, so pretty permanent. In the healthiest case, which like I said is kind of rare until you reach integral, transcend and include. Carl.
Is there any information on how often people go backwards?
I haven't seen anything on that except that the deal is not very often. Now, people do reset in kind of in short term. Something will pop up and bang, you're right back there at power. I mean, we've all had that. Just something pops up and poof. But I think for your center of gravity, I think not.
Well, I just was thinking of a national example would be South Africa right now, where they
Yes.
have regressed more into the power struggle.
Yes,
stage.
actually that's true. On a cultural level, yeah, you do see regression.
But it's a complex picture. It's not, you can't just say,
Yeah.
oh yeah, they did that.
Yep.
Well, I think nationally, terror sucks us right back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every group, everybody pulls out the flag, can't speak out. Huge.
Very good
Very
example.
Yeah.
Put the numbers on a graph. I'm an old engineer, love graphs. It's kind of interesting to just see it like this. Here's the Western culture, the first world culture. About, what you might expect. This is dominant. These are kind of, over the decades, these are going to get bigger, 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 and these are going to kind of become a little smaller. But basically, this is a picture. But what's interesting about this picture is, imagine this for Iraq. Imagine this for Ashland Rowing Club. I know a bunch of you are from our rowing club here. There's a profile. You've got 100 people together, and you just figure out where they are, and you put this together, and bang, you've got some semblance of how the group thinks. Imagine this for the Democratic Party, for the Republican Party. It's an interesting thing to think about. Okay, we've built a framework. We're going to now look at 4 or 5 applications, examples. Mm-hmm.
It appears that you have 8 things there, and I see integral. What's that eighth one?
Global.
Well, that's what I thought I was saying, global.
Yeah.
Are you going to go into that?
No,
At all?
not tonight. It's a little mistake in my thing. When I originally did this, I used as many as I could, and then I'm not. So, sorry.
Too precious.
You guys are too perceptive. Yeah. One last comment before I launch into these examples. If you are in a church or a Rotary Club or something like that and you need a program, I would love to come and do this. I can do a short form. I've done half-hour versions of this, 2-hour versions, whatever. So I'm available and I love doing it. So if you've got that, let's rock and roll. Come and see me. Let's go to 5 or 4, depending on our time. And I've used the word mistake. And we're going to dwell on these. These are going to go a little slower now. Make sure I got everything covered here. And these are a little bit more harder to understand, I think. At least when I've done this before, people sort of say, what? What'd you say there? So let's think about what we just saw. And let's group the stages into 3 groups. We're going to think about law and order, which is conventional, traditional, middle of the pack. Okay, we'll group that with autonomy, modern, rational. That's the big, heavy center, okay? Now let's think of magic and power would then be called pre-conventional or pre-rational. Think about that. So folks whose lives are centered down here, whose value structures are down here, they just don't have the tools, the experience, the value structure, whatever, to think law and order, to think autonomously. And then post. Post-conventional or trans-rational. Okay, that's the setup. Here's the problem. Here's the problem, and we all do this a lot. Sometimes pre and post look a lot alike. They can look and sound similar. And until you peel them back and see what the underlying value structures are, you can get fooled. And you can make a bad discernment. So I got 3 examples here. I'm going to try to move through them. The protest rally. It's a beautiful afternoon in May. Save the whale. Open mic. Illegal. The cops bust it up, take the kids downtown in the paddy wagons, and they find out there's 2 kinds of kids there. They're both long-haired. They're both unshaven. But one of the groups thought it was a nice day. They hate the establishment. They're just sick and tired of the goddamn establishment. So they were out there, raising hell. That's group 1. Group 2 happens to be graduate students in ecology. And they want to save the whale. And they're looking for a forum to stand up and talk. So they say, save the whale. They look kind of similar. Isn't that interesting? And until you sit there and talk to them, and you say, well, why, kid, why are you doing this? Well, I want to save the whale, or I'm just sick and tired of the establishment. That kind of thing. They look similar. Don't be fooled. Be careful. Another example, a good friend of mine is a builder. And, in this world here, when you're going to build a house or you're going to get a subcontractor to put up the sheetrock, you sign a contract. That's how you do it. It's pretty normal. Well, my wife and I are in an arrangement where we, with a couple of other couples, actually bought a boat. Pretty expensive. Big deal for us. And we went together, we wrote some stuff down, but we don't have a contract. We don't have a contract. We couldn't sue each other, on the basis of a contract. We don't have one. Why? We trust each other. We've had this for 4 years now. There's never been even close to being a problem with that. Never even close. Okay? I bet you guys have those arrangements too. However, my builder friend says he's worked with people who say, my word is like an oak tree. You can trust me. I don't need to sign anything. I don't like contracts. I won't sign with you. And within weeks, the guy is screwing him. He's pulling fast ones. Everything was about power, about me, about getting ahead. So I would say those same words. My word is like an oak tree. You can trust me. And sure enough, you can. And this guy, you can't. So you have to be kind of careful. Okay? Third example, is it Shaktari? Yeah, you asked a minute ago for kind of a walking through different. This one here, I hope I'm not being offensive to you guys. I'm saying stuff, just call it like I see it. So I'm going to talk about spirituality. And this is going to be exactly what you were talking about, Shaktari. The greats of spirituality, Jesus, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, Moses, all had profound experiences. And they're pretty well documented, some of them, not all. Some of them are pretty well documented. They have to use analogy type words. Moses sees a burning bush, and some kind of thing happened to him. He comes down the hill and he's got some stuff to share. Yeah. All of them realize that it's ineffable. They can't really spell out a recipe for what they experienced. But they know it was profound, and obviously they became powerful people, changed the course of history. What did they do? They pointed. They didn't say, well, here's how you do it. They said, well, I'm going to kind of point the direction. You've got to figure it out for yourself. So that is highly evolved people up here, and they use a certain language structure. And they wound up, the Buddha's the best example because he had 45 years. Jesus had a little less than 1 year to do what he had to do. But Buddha had 45 years, so he could set up a whole big system that's going to help people here move along. Okay, but now let's leave that aside for a second and go down here to folks that are more primitive in their value structure. They have authentic experiences. Do not demean those experiences. Meaning in the Deep South, well, even where I come from in Missouri, they go to a tent meeting, a revival meeting, and they have something that's very real. I don't doubt that. But they don't have the context and the thought patterns to do what these guys did. But they might use the same language. They might say, God reached down and touched me and changed my life, which is kind of, if you read the Synoptic Gospels, is kind of what Jesus said. And you think, oh, there's something different between that guy and Jesus. There's a difference here. Something different. Don't be fooled. Realize you've got to peel back the value structure and see how many perspectives the person can take and how big a picture the person can see before you jump to the conclusion that they're saying the same thing. That's all I'm saying here, is just you got to watch out and realize that different value structures can sound similar. Is this making any sense? Okay, good. I'm seeing glazed eye, but now I'm seeing heads nod. So, okay. Here's one more thing, especially by way of Shaktari's question. To me, this is one of the most interesting features of this whole research is we're talking about stages now, stages of value, stages of development. There's also experiences. There's spiritual experiences or spiritual states. And what the research shows is that you can have a similar experience at various stages, and you will interpret it according to the stage you happen to be at. So, like I just said, the tent meeting, I was saved by Jesus. But say one of you is up hiking in Yosemite. I'm going to make an assumption. Maybe you're up in here somewhere. You're hiking in Yosemite. You crest over the top of the hill and you see this unbelievable vista. And you're by yourself, you stop, there's a kind of a stillness, and something happens to you. Something deep is shifted in you in some way. You come home, you realize, I can't really tell people about it. But best I could do would be to say, I felt a connection with all of life, some kind of a connection. And I feel motivated to go out and save life. It's threatened. That's what I'm going to do. That's a whole different reaction than to say I was saved by Jesus. So, see how that works? It's just, I think it's interesting. So maybe that's an answer to your question, Shakhtari, is that it's interpreted in the context. Okay. Move along. I think this is the most interesting. This is Ken Wilber's explanation for terrorism and what we can do about it, basically. And again, this is going to hit close to home. 2 stories to start with. I'll take a little sip of water here before I go into the slide. Young man grows up in Saudi Arabia. He looks out at the West. What does he see? He sees ridicule. He sees debasement of everything that he holds dear. Everything the West, modernity stands for, puts down his God. So, when this young man straps on explosives and walks into a crowded bazaar in Tel Aviv and blows up 50 innocent people, he feels not a shred of guilt, nor does his family. In fact, he's doing a good thing. He's helping God blow up the great Satan. Right? That's a pretty good rendition. I think I'm telling it about like it is. Not a shred of guilt. Story 2. Young man grows up in Missouri. Pretty sincere Catholic. Goes back to college back east. Takes Western Civ freshman year. Great class. Loves it. Loves the instructor. Gets to know the instructor. Whoa. The instructor's an atheist. Yikes. Likes this guy. I like this instructor, but what am I going to do? How am I going to go back home? How am I going to reconcile this? I don't know where to go. I'm experiencing existential angst. Something is wrong here. So take those 2 stories and just kind of hold them in your head. Obviously, I'm that second guy. I didn't blow up anything in Tel Aviv, but autonomous thinking equals modernity, equals science, extremely successful in the outer world. It's dominant. If something is unscientific in our culture, it is dog meat. It doesn't work. It just isn't there. Modernity took a look at the interior life as it saw it in the law and order phase, i.e. the heavy Spanish Inquisition, the hierarchy of the church, the abuses in the church, and it said, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. You can't hook an electrocardiogram to it or an electroencephalogram to it. You can't get brainwaves off. I mean, it's not there. Let me read you a great quote that I just found in this book by Daniel Goleman. I mentioned him a little bit ago. And he's going to quote William James. William James, the great American psychologist of the 19th century. And he uses the word medical materialism. This is James now. Medical materialism finishes up St. Paul by calling his vision on the road to Damascus a discharging lesion of the occipital cortex. He being an epileptic. Okay, fine. Cross him off. It snuffs out St. Teresa as an hysteric. I don't know if you've read St. Teresa, but unbelievable writing. Profound person. St. Francis of Assisi as an hereditary degenerate. Okay, he was. I mean, he came from that background. George Fox's discontent with the shams of his age and his pining for spiritual veracity, it treats as symptoms of a disordered colon. Okay. All such mental tensions, it says, are, when you come to the bottom of the matter, due to the perverted action of various glands. This is William James talking about how modern medicine views spirituality. Okay, now we're going to switch back to Goleman. So Goleman's going to talk about this quote. To become a psychologist means being socialized, Fred, no offense, okay? Being socialized to having a negative attitude towards spiritual evolution or to be oblivious to that possibility. The upshot is that, as a culture, one of the taboo topics that does not easily enter our collective consciousness is religious experience. Then he jumps ahead. I'm going to jump ahead about half a page. As a nation of closet mystics, because he says everybody has experiences, closet mystics, our theories of human possibility, which is what we're talking about here, human possibility, are, as a whole, very limited. We have a collective blind spot. I think that hits it pretty well. All he's saying is that modernity has just dumped on spirituality, rejected its legitimacy, and threw out the baby, meaning authentic interiority, with the bathwater. Primitive spirituality, a la the Inquisition, a la torture, until you say, okay, fine. Result, bottled up religious fervor, leading to, in the one case in Saudi Arabia, terrorism, in the other case in modern Americans, alienation. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? So, nowhere to go. What's the answer? What's the answer to that? Is there an answer? The answer is yes, there is an answer. Autonomy has its own brand of inquiry, of spirituality. And then green has its version, which is a whole different flavor, and so on up the line. For example, and I love this example, again, it applies to me. There's a whole body of study about what did Jesus actually say. Okay, forget about miracles, forget about all the stuff going on. Just take them and see what he said. What the guy actually had to say. You look at the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You do scholarship on them. You look at outside sources, and there's a complicated thing. Interestingly enough, many, many ministers are very acquainted with this. They know all about this stuff. Well, what comes out of that study is two amazing facts. One is you get a very different Jesus than you do in the law and order based situation that I grew up in. A whole different person, whole different kind of thing. And secondly, that different thing is extremely compelling, extremely interesting, extremely motivating. It really speaks. And, to me maybe most interestingly, the idea of faith. The idea of faith is a non-concept. It just doesn't come up. Nobody says faith's a bad idea, good idea, it just doesn't come up. It's a whole different animal than that. Well, when I went through that in my 20s, that was really helpful. It got me going again. It got me out of this, what am I going to do feeling? So that is how a person can move from being a bottled up law and order stage through this huge cultural mistake we made where we colonized and then tossed out any kind of interiority to where, okay, interiority has a new life of its own. And, P.S., footnote, there may be a phase in there where atheism or non-theism, maybe a more appropriate word, is what you think you are, what you are. And it may be more spiritual than the person who says, oh, I believe in God. So that happens to a lot of folks on the road down, and then they go to green and they go on up. The other thing to say here, and then I'll get your comments on all this, the religious institutions have a huge role here if they'll take this on. Yes, in this country, like I said, ministers on PBS, on Bill Moyers, October 5th last year, had a Jewish rabbi and a Christian guy. It was fantastic just to see the way they think. This thinking that I'm talking about tonight is very out there. People are into it. They just need to do it. Okay, that's in this country. But how about in Saudi Arabia, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan? What if the imam, not me, if I go over there and say, hey guys, you're on the wrong track, not going to work. But what if the imam stands up and says, guys, the prophet did not intend for you to strap on explosives and blow people up. No, we have a whole other deal called Sufism, the Sufis. It's a whole mystical sect. You know, you guys here would be very interested in how that works. The kind of analysis they do, the kind of thinking, the kind of purgation they go through, the dancing, the whole deal. It works. Let's try it. That would be real different. And you know what? Those imams know about that. They know about that stuff. The clerics, the Islamic Muslim clerics, they know about that. We've got to encourage the moderate Muslims, the educated ones, to do that. That can turn terrorism around. I think if we go about blowing up terrorists, that's our plan right now. We're just blowing them all up. Every one we blow up, 10 new ones. Somebody was talking about the madrasas, how they're just growing like crazy. I don't know if that was here or someplace, but growing like crazy. The schools for the young kids. So anyway, that's the thought about what autonomy, modernity has done wrong, the baby with the bathwater, and what we can do. Fred?
I see it differently. As I see it, the beginning stage, that is that the magic, God is like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or something. You believe it's a belief based because some authority told you, so it's more to the primitive. And to me, the next stage of questioning and atheism, to me, is a positive growth stage.
Right. Right.
And the third stage is having some direct experience, some spiritual experience or awakening. And that's like the pre and post. That's a mature spirituality
Exactly.
as opposed to the Easter Bunny kind of spirituality.
Exactly. I agree with that 100%. In fact, if I said something different than that, I didn't mean to. I agree with that.
Right, so it's not all within, I don't know if you're implying that it all happens in the autonomy.
Oh, yeah, no.
But these are stages.
They're stages. It's just that this is where, culturally, we really screwed up.
Yes.
Not
I
deliberately.
don't think it's a screw up. I think it's a necessary step.
Well, it's a screw up if this guy says, you guys are full of baloney. If he just denies and demeans.
Of course, until he reaches the next stage.
Yeah.
Of course, that's inevitable. That's part of the package.
Yeah. I know for myself, I've on many occasions I've been kind of dismissive of people that go to tent meetings and have experiences. And I've come to realize, no, do not be dismissive. They are having real, authentic experiences. They're just on the road, just like I'm on the road. So, does this make sense? Hope this is not too offensive because, this is important stuff. This is where we're going to begin to solve terrorism, I think. Okay. Holy cow. I'm going to short circuit a little bit here. Let's skip that one. Let me think about that one. Yeah. I'm going to do this one and then we'll wrap it up. This is, I talked about earlier, Green's mistake. Green, postmodern, we're all equal. No more hierarchy. Okay, no more hierarchy means no stages. Everybody's equally legit. But the way Green does it, and this was kind of your question, does Green do this too? Yeah, Green says, well, they're all equally legit. So I think I'll go with mine. Yeah, I'll go with mine. Mine, yeah, that's how we'll do it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to deny the existence of stages. See how that would work? Like there's no such thing as stages and hierarchy. Therefore, and this is the next little step, I deny the possibility of development, that people do develop through stages. I deny that. So I get a constipation going in the whole system here. Green doesn't move to integral, it gets blocked up. To fix things, I don't think there's any easy solution apart from just a mental discipline that says, well, wait a second. This is real. This is documented. This stuff is actually how it is. There are stages. People do move along, and you, Ms. Green, Mr. Green, can take the next step if you want. If you want to do that, it's up to you. And like I said, boomeritis, this is, if humankind is stopped here, bad things are going to happen. Does that make sense? Are we doing okay with this?
Talk about that last sentence.
Oh, feels like a death. And that's true of all the stages, but in particular, when the little feelings that something's wrong with my value structure, that little pre-verbal feeling, that starts to get a hold of you and you think, God, everything I believe seems to have a problem. It is like a dark night of the soul. I'm using that term in another context from what it normally is used in, but it is a little bit like that. Everything I believe, all the values I hold, don't seem to be working quite right. And as you dig and dig and dig, you find out nothing's really working quite right. And then you begin to embrace the new one, and then it takes over, and then pretty soon you say, okay, I see how this works. And 4 or 5 years go by as you really learn how to work the new one. Does that answer that? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what is it about the shift from green to integral that the green thought process doesn't like? Doesn't
Mainly,
want to move on.
yeah, because
Stalls
integral.
out there because in the green, if everybody, it's kind of a self-centered, can become
Yeah.
a self-centered thing. Well, yeah, everybody's right, everybody's cool, but
Yeah.
I'm righter because
Well,
because it's me.
yeah. Here's
And
the
then if you have to shift to something more accepting.
postmodern deconstructionist. This friend of mine is in graduate school. He has a kind of a physics math background, and he was in a seminar with a person that was from a sociology background. And he said, well, an important reality is F equals ma, the physical, the basics physics. That's an important reality. And this person said to him, that's your reality. That's not my reality. And boy, that for me was a huge light. I mean, what, physics isn't a reality? Come on, come on, come on. It is. It just is. That's the relativity, the deconstructed thing. And a green loves that. A green likes to be able to say, well, that's not my reality. I don't need to pay any attention to what you're saying about that. That's not my reality. And to let go of that and say, well, at the end of the day, that's based on a good idea, but that isn't a good idea. The underlying principle is probably all right, but to say that, there's your reality and my reality and I can take it or leave it, no. That's a death for a real green. To go back to having a hierarchy. That there really is a more evolved folks than others. Does that make sense, Gene?
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, we're all equal, but do it my way. Is there a parallel, do you think, with regard to George Orwell's Animal Farm? Equality, but some are more equal than others.
More equal than others. I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right. I hadn't connected that, but that sounds right. Yeah, Shaktari.
You know what you were talking at the bottom there about it feels like a death?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, and I'm thinking that probably at any point when you're at the point where your life conditions and your available responses no longer work, at each stage, that it feels that way.
I think that's right.
Regardless of what stage you're at.
Yep.
Until you shift to a new way of thinking.
Yep. I think that's right. So you do go through multiple deaths in your life. Okay, we got 10 minutes. I'm sort of toying with whether to rip through this last section, which I've not presented before, about how to do it. Is that of interest to you guys? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to be at turbo velocity here. Cultural implications. So this is, how are you going to do it? Good ideas, John. So how are you going to make this real? Let's start big picture, overall vector, understand and apply the idea of stages. Just that. And I've already said there's a lot of different systems like this. This is a very friendly one, not the newest. There's all kinds of other systems. Don't really care. Just the idea that there are stages. And look at the cultural profile, that little histogram, bar graph thingy. Think about that before you just insert yourself into some situation culturally. Build systems and institutions that encourage personal development. The library here. I mean, hello. Book groups, sports for kids, travel abroad, all that stuff that just causes personal development. And do what you can to enhance the integral value structure. Not a good idea, however. You need to move to the next stage, and I'm here to help. Sort of obvious. Arrogant, yes. But deeper than that, we need all the stages. There's some very good folks who are at Law and Order, will be for the next 30 years, adding value, keeping us together. Don't do that to them. Okay? I was going to elaborate that, but I'm not going to. Personally, so that was culture. Now let's go personal. Got 2 slides here. The first one is strategy, and the next slide is going to be called tactics. This is a subtle slide. You're going to say, well, hello, of course, obviously. Personal implications, understand the stage concept, was just said culturally, see it in action, contribute, rein in your own judgmentalness and antipathy for other stages. Just do that. Okay, but the thing I wanted to really talk about here is I'm pretty convinced that everybody has an organizing principle for their lives, an overarching thing. Maybe it's unconscious, unspoken, but here's how I'm living my life. This is the overarching thing. And I'm going to suggest, again, I was going to take 5 or 10 minutes, but live as fully and positively as you can at the stage you're at. Live fully. And I just want to put a quick little PS on that. This would include hedonism. Like, I got to have that Beamer. That's fully, I mean, I got to, it includes that, but it transcends it as well. Because there's going to come a time when that Beamer is not going to do it for you. Sorry, it's just not. But then you can say, well, what's full life for me is I'm going to help out. I'm going to help at the soup kitchen. That's not too bad. So learn everything you can at the stage you're at. Be engaged. Emphasize the healthy, positive, dial back the negative, and then in right time, move to the next stage. Pretty simple. I mean, based on what I'm saying tonight, it's pretty simple, but I think this is a subtle kind of a profundity. Live fully. And then let this strategy inform everything you do. That would be the message. And like what, everything? What do you mean everything? Can you give me some specifics, John? This is just, yeah. Ken Wilber recommends disciplines, but, big but, practice in light of and informed by the overall strategy of living as fully as possible. So, given this, if you've only got time for one thing, maybe you're a young mom. I watch my grandkids, and especially our daughter-in-law, she's in her early 30s, running around like crazy, got a job, these 2 kids. She hadn't got time for anything, really. But she's making a little bit of time for physical. I was going to ask for a show of hands for who's got some kind of a physical discipline going. Let's just see a show of hands. Who's got some kind of physical discipline going? Yeah, a lot of people. Really key. If you can't do anything else, do that. There's a good gym I know of in town, right, for older people? Andy's gym. Do that. Let's just say 3 days a week, half an hour, heart rate up, minimum. Hopefully a lot more than that. If you've got time for 2 things, get your brain exercise. In the 60s, I was kind of brought up in this deal about you're too cerebral, you got to go with your feelings. Star Wars, use your feelings, Luke, use the Force, all that. That's a bad deal. You got to also, it's a good deal because if we're too cerebral, fine, But you got to also you got to subscribe to a good newspaper. I think that's key. The media is so bad, frankly. Just the network news, it totally. Read a good book every month at least. Be in a book group. Have some place that challenges your mind. Don't just be a passive taker-inner. If at your job, frame it such that you're going to stretch your mind by doing something. Challenge your mind. Be mentally engaged. Again, we're going really quick, and you can tailor this to however it works. But third thing, if you've got time for these 2 and you've got time for something else, have a spiritual discipline. What's that? Meditation, of course, is the royal road. I know a bunch of you are into that. But let's remember that it doesn't have to be. I know 2 people who have looked me in the eye and said, John, my spiritual discipline is rowing. And they're serious. And I can tell that it works for them. It focuses the mind, sharpens the mind, reduces distraction in service of transformation. Okay? That's what I mean by a spiritual discipline. For some people, it's crafts, it's art, it's that kind of thing. It's getting into things that focus the mind in service of transformation. Big, open, lots of ways of doing it, but that would be the third thing. Do something like that in support of living fully. Fourth thing, the shadow side. We all have repressed psychological material. And again, the received wisdom is you're not going to find that by meditating. It will follow you all the way to nirvana and back. That was the quote. Your shadow will follow you to nirvana and back. You got to have help, some kind of help. possibly psychoanalysis or psychotherapy, possibly a technique or a good wife that says, John, you're full of shit. Do you understand that? That kind of thing. You guys know what I mean?
I got a lot of that.
Yeah. Some way to face, acknowledge, and own your own dark side, your own repressed material. You've got to do that at some point along the way if this is what you want to do. If this isn't what you want to do, then no, I don't know. I don't think it matters. But if you do, then there's it. Ethics, it's sort of funny to have that in this list. When you're at the earlier stages, ethics is necessary in order to have focus and concentration. Okay, 5 minutes. You have to just force it. But as you reach higher and higher stages, ethics is a byproduct. You just don't want to do bad stuff. It's just not interesting to you. But I think it helps to have a checklist, to go just look and see, because again, the Enron thing really got to me, because we had the CEO of Enron spoke to my business school class. Great guy, big hero kind of thing. Turned out to be a really bad guy. So check into ethics. Look at your own personal ethics, especially the fuzzy cases. Fuzzy cases. Cheat on your taxes? Is it immaterial? Is it really immaterial? I don't know. Relationships. See, we're moving out. We're taking larger and larger perspectives. That's a key of moving up to higher stages, is more perspectives. With relationships, the idea is that at the very least, with the other person, you'd say, well, what stage do you think they're at? If you like this set, fine, use this. If you like some other set of stages, where are they in terms of their values and their evolution? Where are they? But there's other things. There's type, Jungian type, Enneagram type. There are people who are thinkers and feelers, intuitive and sensate. What are they? What are they? This guy I'm working with. What is she? Which way is she? And then relate to her that way. That's part of relationships. Just get in there and do that with the people you're with. Go the extra mile to be in their shoes. It's kind of the net, but there's techniques. There's ways of doing it. So do that and take their perspective. Like, a lot of my friends just really get passionate about how much they hate George Bush. Well, okay. But you know what? Conservatism, I didn't show the slide here, but there's a lot of value in fundamental conservatism. A lot of value. We want to raise our kids to be responsible, to be fiscally responsible, so on. Let's don't lose that baby with the bathwater. So get in their shoes. That's the idea. Finally, community. Don't be a hermit. Be out there. Be involved. And how big is that? Is it the world? Is it Ashland? Is it your little, whatever it is? Be involved. Be committed. If you do these things with this in mind, you'll be doing what I'm talking about tonight. It's that simple. Questions, comments, thoughts? I know it sounds so simple. But
When's your book come out?
if I could find a publisher, I could tell you. So I'm at that point now. I'm sending out query letters, but it's probably a year. Probably a year. So, well, thank you. Oh, Fred?
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about as we're going through this is like kids, and this is, I'm sure, what the values conflict is about. Just in the normal course of living, somebody who's 30, 40 years old and has kids has the maturity to handle a whole lot of cultural material and sexual material and so forth that kids, 10 and 12 and 14 aren't ready to handle.
Can't do. Yeah.
So how does that fit in with this whole structure?
Well, I think just what you said, like my wife's book group talked about atonement, that book. This gal's 12 years old and she does a bad thing. So how do we think about her? Bryony, the girl in the book. How do we, I think you just have to say she didn't have the maturity to know what to do. I'm maybe not even grokking your question.
No, this all is assuming, I think there's an underlying assumption here, an implicit assumption that this is all about adults going through life. But then how do you apply this to raising children?
Yeah.
And exposing children to certain stages?
Yeah. For sure, the earlier stages apply to kids. In fact, I wanted to hand you out a handout that's got that in it. I think I'm not going to be able to get to it. right now.
Okay,
That's-
yeah, it's a big question.
It's a huge
Just-
question.
Just to consider.
Yep.
I haven't thought it out at all.
Yeah. This is just a summary of what we talked about here, just to give you something to take away.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.